Not the size of the screen as much as the people with you. And that's a whole important thing. It's a community. And I think cult films bring a community of people together that have like interests. That's good for the trailer.
Tonight on the DTD podcast, we have documentary filmmaker Bill Fulkerson. He's a New England creative of a different breed. He hosts and produces the weekly podcast Outside the Cinema. It's a humorous and well-informed show that has dissected cult cinema for over 13 years now. 650 episodes in and counting, and he's been able to showcase his knowledge in various documentaries and podcasts. Survival of the Film Freaks. It's Bill's first venture to the other side of the camera. He opted to write and direct a documentary to answer the question that we're going to talk about tonight. Where is cult cinema in the age of technology? So let's get into it.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
How about no, you crazy Dutch bastard? What we've got here is failure to communicate.
60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
That's cute. I remember when I had my first beer.
Why so serious?
I am serious, and don't call me sir.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD podcast. I'm excited about this one tonight. I've been listening to this guy for a long time, and he's introduced me into quite a few strange yet entertaining films. He hosts Outside the Cinema podcast, and now he's a documentary filmmaker with another film on the way. So let's get into it. Bill, thanks and welcome to the show.
Oh man, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm excited to be here and talk about my favorite subjects.
Is a film. We're not going to talk about hockey tonight. So yeah, I know. So let's get into this. So you make this documentary. Now, we've had a couple documentary filmmakers on here and a couple that have made films, more of the nostalgic flair to them. And I got that really big off of yours, too, was that big nostalgic flair when I was a kid and the video store. And we'll get into the video stores of when I was a kid, because as we learned when I was with Taylor Morton, it wasn't even a video store. It was a gas station that rented out VHS tapes. So I want to talk about what your film focuses on, and that's cult cinema. Now, that's a very broad net that casts out when we talk about film. It encompasses a lot of things. And I think what people think when they first go into cult cinema is they think like Rocky Horror Picture Show or, you know, these exploitation films or whatever. And I think even that term throws things off. So in your eyes, it's a little different. Cult cinema, I think, is more of a nostalgic thing or more of a memory-laden movie than necessarily a cult film status. So what is your definition of cult cinema?
You know, we asked that same question to pretty much everyone we interviewed for the movie, and we didn't really necessarily get the same answer twice. And even my thought process on what cult films is different. I look at it as any movie that people will gravitate towards in a group setting or a setting of a specific reason why they're getting into that movie. And anything can be a cult movie in my opinion. It doesn't have to be a horror movie. It doesn't have to be an exploitation movie. It can, we talked a bit about Star Wars and how Star Wars is the biggest cult movie of all time because it has just this fervent. Is that right? Is that even a word? Anyway, we'll say
feverish,
fervent. I like fervent though.
Okay, let's go with fervent. Then I'll go with that.
Fervent. But has this fervent following of fans that want to know everything about it, and I think that's at the heart of it. That's what cult film and cult comic books and cult TV shows and all of that stuff's the same. It's just something that really garners a group of people to have a passionate following for it.
Yeah, I think the same thing. And I think cult cinema, like I said, And you said it's not just necessarily these B movies that we think about, although those are at the forefront of the cult cinema kind of area.
Oh,
But
for sure, for sure.
but you look at films like, I would even consider like The Goonies and things like that cult cinema, because they have such a strong following behind them. I mean, even The Sandlot or movies like that have. I think you could even take it so far as to say like Shawshank Redemption. As serious a movie as it is, it has a cult following. I hear people say all the time, man, if that's on TV when I'm flipping through, I've got to stop and watch it. Me, I don't understand the big deal about it. I'm not a huge fan of it. I tell people that all the time. But do you agree that I think that's the way it goes, whether it's a $100 million movie or a $100,000 movie?
Yeah, I don't think it makes a difference. I think depending on who you talk to, people will use the word cult in different, connotations and different meanings. Like for some people, when you say cult, that's a genre to them.
Right.
Whereas I look at cult film as anything can fall under that, like that banner, if you will, it's the type of thing where if it's a drama, if it's a romance, if it's a horror movie, if it's just a bizarre art house movie, it can be cult. But I think you also have to kind of temper, your expectations when you discuss films with people in terms of what their idea is of what can be considered a cult film. Like my wife, for example, is not really into, weird movies or I watched the most bizarre shit that's out there.
Yes.
The most violent. There's with the ongoing joke where he's like, what are you watching for the show this week? And I'll say whatever movie it is. And she'll be like, how rapey is it? Because every Italian movie, it seems like that we watch from like the 70s, it's just littered with like women being treated terribly. So like that to me that's in the cult umbrella. But for someone like her that doesn't follow that stuff, any, mainstream horror movie can fall into that category. So I think it's really about, understanding your audience and who you're preaching to. Like when we made Survival, we knew that we were going pretty niche for who our audience was going to be. And, it was more a passion project than trying to get it out there to the masses. If we could educate a bit on the way, that would be great. But, we knew where our sweet spot was going to lie with people. So I feel like it's the same way when you're talking about movies with people, is you have to kind of get an idea. Like you start with a broader question before you jump right into your, oh, well, how do you feel about Nazi exploitation films from the mid 70s? Like you have to kind of like meter that to figure if you can go that way, or if you're going to stick with like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah. And I think that's a big point to it, is because I'm not into a lot of the stuff that people would consider like hardcore cult films or anything like that. I'm not into those, but I am into a lot of very crazy ones. Like I've talked about it on the show and on a couple other people's shows. I'm a huge fan of Chopping Mall from the 80s. I'm a huge fan of Death Spa. Death Spa. There's a lot of them, and they're more campy than anything. Hard Ticket to Hawaii. You look at like the Andy Sedaris films and stuff. I'm not into the really weird. I kind of classify them as the Rob Zombie era, because he talks about those a lot, like Ilsa, She-Wolf of the whatever, or just the crazy ones that he kind of models his films after, House of a Thousand Corpses, all that different kind of stuff. But I think that what is great about this genre is there is a place for everyone in it. And when you say that you niched out, for this film, I think though people can get a look at your film and say, wow, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know fell into that. And I didn't know that I liked that kind of film.
Yeah. I think, almost by accident, we just kind of, cause we went with our nostalgia feel. Kyle that I made the film with, who, co-directed it with me. And we did everything, down the middle in terms of like co-writing, co-directing, co-producing. He shot a bunch of it. I shot a bunch of it. And, we kind of, and Kyle's a little bit younger than me. He's about 10 years or so younger. They're actually more than that, more like 12 or 13 years younger than me. Probably more than that, but we'll stop at 12. So I don't sound like an old man. Yeah. But it's, we really kind of just dug our heels in with our nostalgia, and knowing that like, even if you're not into some of that type of films, you're always kind of curious as to what's out there, whether you're going to want to watch more than the trailer, that's a different story. But we found that the film then connected with people just on, like you had mentioned earlier, on that nostalgia level, and was not necessarily something we expected, because it was just kind of like, I want to make this documentary. I've got all this cult film knowledge from the last, dozen or so. Well, at the time it was like, 8 or 9 years of OTC. Let's try to make this documentary and just kind of like get out there and, give our voice to the argument, because it's not like we're the first people that ever made a documentary about cult films. There's been a glut of them the last few years, and we knew we were diving into a pool that already had a bunch of people in it, but we wanted to give our film something that those others didn't have. We felt we did that. It was kind of a happy accident the way that it turned out, but it ended up working out pretty good for us so far.
So what was it as a kid that got you set? Because like you said, you're more of you for your podcast, you watch some really strange films and stuff. What was it about your childhood, or what got you into these films as a kid?
I mean, I started like a lot of other kids with, weird stuff on the shelf at the video store. Box art was a big thing for me. But my dad, when I was probably, I don't know, maybe like 7 or 8, my dad bought 2 VCRs, and like those old school big VCRs that were like the big boxes that were like this tall and like this wide. He moved them, and he bought what he called dubbing cables. And so he started to record virtually every film that we would rent. So we would go to whatever we would bring home, and he would just make a copy of them. And a lot of times the copies were garbage, because that was when they had, what was it called? Cineview or some type of anti-copying,
right?
Not even software, just like built into the tape. So when you would make a copy of it, the screen would go from really light to like really, really dark. And then it would get really, really light again. But he didn't care. He was just like, oh, well, if I'm paying the money to rent this and I want to keep a copy of it, I'm going to do that. And I'm like, hey, more power to you. So for me, it really started with, of all films, it was Friday the 13th, Part 4.
Wow, that's pretty far into the series.
Well, yeah. And that was probably, I don't remember what year that was, 86 or so, maybe 85, 86.
Yeah.
But I was probably, I was like 8 or 9 years old. So he made a tape that had, if I remember correctly, it was 3 films on the tape. And it was like Police Academy was the first movie. The second movie was Porky's 2 the next day. And the third film on the tape was Friday the 13th, Part 4. So I saw the last 5 minutes of Porky's 2 The Revenge, or whatever the Porky's 2 was. It was The Revenge or the next day. Porky's 2 the next day. I saw the last 5 minutes of that, because I was obsessed with the hockey mask and Jason when I was like 8 or 9 years old, or however old I was at the time. So I watched Friday the 13th Part 4 a whole bunch of times.
Right.
And that was kind of like, I want to watch more horror movies. And then we had a tape that had Nightmare on Elm Street 3 on it, Dream Warriors. So I watched Dream Warriors a lot. But one of the other ones that I watched early on that kind of pushed me even further was David Lynch's Dune, which, even if you watch it now, is like a fever dream of a film, because it was made with a pretty decent amount of money. And it's like, you look at it now and you're like, who decided to give David Lynch all this money to make this movie? And I love it. I mean, it's a mess, but like, there was something weird and different about that movie that I had never seen before. And I was super interested about and I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9, 10 years old or whatever, but there was like a perversity about that movie that just I don't want to say it lit a fire in me, but it made me so much more curious about what is going on. And then, that leads to stuff like RoboCop, and 9-year-old kid should never watch the unrated director's cut of RoboCop. But sure enough, I did. And my parents it wasn't that they didn't care that I was watching the stuff. It was just like, I just did it. And it was just like, well, he's not bothering anybody. So I would watch. It's probably amazing that I didn't turn out to be like a serial killer or something with some of the stuff I watched at such a young age.
This would probably be a way different conversation.
Yeah, it would be. And I would not be sitting in my house. I'd be sitting in the big house.
Right.
But no, it just really it was like all these old videos and these my dad made these tapes. And then when I got old enough, I went to Gold Star Video, which was the video store in our town. There was a couple of them. Gold Star had a better selection of horror movies than Rowley Home Video. I'm Massachusetts born and bred. I've lived here my whole life. God willing, I'll get out of here at some point and live somewhere else. But so I would ride my bike down, and they would do like Dollar Tuesdays, and we'd have half days of school, and we'd rent like 3 or 4 horror movies, and we'd ride our bikes down, and we'd stop at the McDonald's in town on the way back and come home and then just sit in my basement and watch horror movies. And I discovered so many movies that I had no business watching. Like I Spit on Your Grave was one that always sticks out in my head, that like, we were like, yeah, this cover of this movie, it's got this like half naked girl on and she's got a knife. This is going to be sick. And then we watched it,
and it really
we
is
were
sick.
Like, yeah, but not the sick that we were thinking it was going
Right.
to be. It was just like, oh man, I feel really bad about watching that. But that also started to give me an appreciation for that stuff early on, because yeah, it's a reprehensible piece of work, but there's art that goes into that. And there's an idea that like, there's a story being told here that's more than just violence and rape. And like, there's, the revenge side of it, and people are getting their comeuppance. And it really illustrates the point of like, if you do something terrible, there's a really good chance you're going to pay for it. So like, I started to look at that stuff early on. And I think that's really kind of where my love came from.
Yeah. But even when you talk about a film like that, and that is, it's considered a very disgusting film, and rightfully so, they remade it.
Yeah, with 3 sequels and a prequel.
Yeah.
3 sequels and then a direct sequel to the original.
Right. And so you look at it and you think, okay, well, what was it about it? Because for so long, and you look at people like Wes Craven and all these people that have made these very tame, like, Wes Craven, Scream is huge. They're making Scream 5 right now. But he starts with Last House on the Left, and all these things that people don't think about where these people started from. And that's kind of where I was leading with this, was that, James Gunn, and I told you before that I wanted to talk about this guy. I mean, he started on The Toxic Avenger, which, if you're looking for a ridiculous movie, I don't think they get much more ridiculous than it, other than maybe Poultrygeist or something like that. But you look
anything under that trauma umbrella is in that wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. But even if you look at Toxic Avenger, one, it became a cartoon. It was like a Saturday morning cartoon. You look at James Gunn. You look at James Gunn, who directed it. Now he's making $200, $300, $400 million movies and has carte blanche in Hollywood. He can tell them what he wants. There's not another director that you can look at right now that has been with the Marvel Universe, made huge things off it, gone over to DC to make Suicide Squad. While he's making Suicide Squad, Marvel begs him to come back and do more stuff over at Marvel. It's unreal, the kind of clout that he has. If you look at Jack Nicholson, he got his start with like Russ Meyer and things like that, in smaller films. There's a lot that has happened in Hollywood, or a lot of people that are around these days that came from these films, and they really kind of cut their teeth on these films. And they're more than just memories for people. They are actual, very groundbreaking in the cinema world.
Right. Well, James Gunn, we gotta make sure we get James Gunn's stuff right. He worked on Romeo and Juliet.
Okay.
Not Toxic Avenger, if I'm not mistaken. He was a writer on Romeo and Juliet, and then he also wrote on Sergeant Kabuki Man, or one of the
NYPD
things. Yeah, he was very intertwined with the trauma people. Because I know Boyd Kaufman.
I had always heard that he was with him for Toxic Avenger, and I had heard director.
Toxic Avengers actually is like, what was it, like 1980, like 84, 85. It's actually a lot older than people think it is. But I know that James Gunn wrote the screenplay for Romeo and Juliet, which was Tromeo's version of Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
But it's fucking insane. It's batshit insane. But I think people, if you want to really get into James Gunn, you go back and you watch Slither.
Okay.
Which was he directed that, and that had Michael Madsen was in it, and a bunch of recognizable people. But like, Slither is a low budget Saturday afternoon type monster movie. And then the idea that this guy, they handed him the keys to the Guardians of the Galaxy films, it's insane to think about it. And like you said, everybody's like, hey, here, sign on with us. We're gonna, we want you to do this series. We want you to do that series. And the fact too that his entire crew and cast, when Marvel fired him for old tweets, and I'm not a big one for cancel culture, but like I feel like we've all said stuff in the past that we would regret at some point. Right. So the fact that like Disney was basically just like, well, we're gonna let you go, and then everyone was just like, well, we're not gonna work on the movie until you bring him back. Right. It says a lot about his character. But I think those movies, like especially when you look at especially the first Guardians of the Galaxy, what makes that movie feel the way it does is James Gunn's direction, because he's coming from this Saturday afternoon matinee creature feature sci-fi feel. And that movie is just, when you boil it down, it's a creature feature with just like a lot of fucking money and a lot of special effects put into it.
Yeah, I mean, and to bring that up, I mean, Lloyd Kaufman's in it. He's in the prison scene. I mean, that's the loyalty that he kept there. And if you look around at all of the films that, or I shouldn't say the films, the actors that he's brought in, he uses, of course, his brother. But I mean, he's worked with like some of the biggest names. When you talk about everything that he's done, the people that he had in it, the people that are big in Hollywood right now. It's unbelievable that he comes from this, I guess you would say, pedigree of quote unquote bad films, and was never really respected until the MCU blew up.
Yep. And the thing is, the guys behind the MCU, there's a bunch of them, but like they understand what makes films fun, and that really kind of reads through the fact of the whole like universe itself. There's all the callbacks, and like you look at like stuff like the Ant-Man movie, those all feel like these like 1980s style like action films in a lot of ways, where they're over the top and they're crazy. They don't look bad because of the money that's put into them, but when you boil it down, it's all the same stories, which is why I feel like you don't have the amount of people that feel that way about the DC movies, is because they're so worried about, well, the Dark Knight was like this dark brooding masterpiece, and what Christopher Nolan did with these Batman movies, that's where we need to go. And you look at what the Marvel people did, and they went the opposite, whereas like it was all about feeling good and making you excited to watch these movies, whereas like, am I going to want to watch a 4-hour cut of Justice League? Like,
right.
It's like it becomes work, whereas I feel like the Marvel films really take from those time periods of when movie making was fun, and the products, like you go back and you watch like the Rambo movies there, and like those those mid 80s Schwarzenegger movies, like like people are getting blown up and they're like these crazy like action things, but like they're fun. At the end of the day, like the good guy gets the girl, he saves the POWs or whatever, and like you feel good about it when you leave. But like, as good as like those Christopher Nolan Batman movies are, like the end of the Dark Knight, or pretty much the entire Dark Knight Returns, the third one, it's just a fucking bummer the whole time. And you don't like at any point feel really good about the way things turn out.
Right.
But in Marvel, like you feel great about the end of all the movies, with the exception obviously of Infinity Wars. But we, at the end of Endgame, we're pretty psyched about the way it went down, and that scene in Endgame where all the heroes come back. That's right. Like that's textbook movie making. That's you need that shot, and that's why guys like James Gunn, I feel like, always seem to kind of kill that, and why I feel guys like Rob Zombie, who pulls from all the stuff that I love. Like I love 70s exploitation films and like Italian giallos, and like, but that stuff is dark and it's sad, and like it's tough to really like make an audience feel good. I mean, obviously, depending on what type of movie you're trying to go for, too. Like, I think you got to pull from the right places. And I'm not a huge Rob Zombie fan in general. I appreciate what he does, but I feel like he tries to do what Tarantino does, but he just doesn't put his things together as well.
Well, so let's talk about that for a minute, because a lot of people will say that. A lot of people have said things about Rob Zombie, like that he messed up the Halloween franchise, which I don't think he really did, because if you look, I mean, it's doing just fine, and it's getting ready to release another film that was taken over. Can you really, I mean, when you think about it, can you really mess up something like that? It's kind of his vision of it. But a lot of people have said that, hey, Rob, stick to making music. We don't want you to make films anymore. And I feel like you can look at a film of his like House of a Thousand Corpses, okay? And when it starts, he had the backing of Universal. That's when he was doing Hollywood Horror Nights and all that kind of stuff. And he was designing the sets and all those kind of things, right? So you watch the beginning of the House of a Thousand Corpses, and it feels very film. I don't know how to describe it. I always tell people, like, you can tell it's a movie set, and you can tell that stuff is there. And I love that about films. I thought, that's what I really like, is when you can tell that it's a movie, because then you can turn your brain off and enjoy it. Yep. But after he screens it kind of for the executives and they tell him, what the fuck did you make? Like, we can't put our name on this. Universal can't back something like this. And they pull, and he says, well, I'll just use my own money. You definitely can see, or at least I can, as that movie progresses along, you see where his money starts coming into it and his full thoughts start coming into it. And it turns into just a mess by the end of it, where it has a very tight storyline, a very tight characterization going through it. And then as he starts to take over it, it becomes just a mess by the end of it. And then you look at, people say they love The Devil's Rejects, but it feels like that mess just continued on through that. And you end up not wanting to watch it because it's almost gory to be gory.
Yeah.
There's no point behind it.
No, and I agree with you 100% on that, Dustin. I think House of Thousand Corpses, the first 45 minutes of that,
absolutely
super tight horror movie. Everything is pulled together. It looks great. You can still see his influences. He's heavily influenced by guys like Dario Argento and Mario Bava with like the lighting and like the mood and the atmosphere. And it's great. And like when you're basically in the like haunted house part of it is kind of like how I look at it. And then it goes underground. It completely falls apart because like all these characters start showing up. There's that doctor guy, and then there's like people in bunny suits, and you're just like, what the fuck is happening now?
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense. And it's kind of like, all right, well, I understand where Universal was coming from, because they were probably kind of like, all right, I get this. And that movie is really just like, if you watch it, it's like, oh, okay, well, he loves the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Okay. He loves Suspiria. Yeah, the colors, and then like the story is very Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You're kind of just like, oh, well, he loves 70s horror. Nothing wrong with that. There's millions of people who love 70s horror. But like, it's just kind of like too much of a mess. At least for me. I know people love that movie, but like it just becomes too much of a mess for me. And you brought up Devil's Rejects, which is his homage to the 70s revenge movie. And it's got a great look. It's hot. It's dusty. It's dirty. It's violent. He's got the right cast in it, I feel, for the most part. And I loved that movie when I first saw it, and being like, this movie is killer. It's everything I want in an homage to like, the 70s road to revenge type movie. But I actually revisited it a few years ago, and upon rewatching it, I was just kind of like, this is really hollow. There's nothing here. It's violence for the sake of violence. Why should I care about these three characters? They haven't, I get, they're awful people, and they're off, and they're doing terrible things. And well, they're the bad guys. You're not supposed to care about them. I'm like, yeah, but I don't care about anybody in this movie. So why would I?
Right.
Why would I watch it? Like, the characterization is non-existent. And that even comes to more to fruition when he made the final one, the 3 from Hell, that came out the last year, which is just like, bro, stop. Just give up those characters. Those characters aren't interesting enough to keep rolling with it. And it's just like, well, let's do this kill scene, and we'll set this kill scene up, and then they'll do this fucked up thing, and then they'll do this. And it's like, if I don't care about your characters, none of that stuff matters.
Yeah, and you can look at a film. We can talk about a movie that I think is great, like American Psycho, where it is a very tight storyline. And I watched a movie about a week or two ago, 10 to Midnight with Charles Bronson. It's mentioned in your
I love that.
documentary. That movie is so much. I feel like American Psycho pulled so much from that movie. Just the look of the killer, the actions of the killer, even the chase scene. If you think back to American Psycho, where he's chasing with a chainsaw and stuff, it almost is like the weird dream state of 10 to Midnight. But you look at that, and people don't think of Charles Bronson as like an action person. But you watch his characters, and even though it's the same guy in every movie, it's what you just said. You care about the character. You care about why he's on this mission, why he's on this revenge mission. And you don't with like the Rob Zombie films at all. And I think that he does them, like you said, you like the cast that he brought together. I really don't like who he puts together. Now, I mean, you can't take away from like Sid Haig and stuff like you can't take away those guys. But when you put your wife in every single film, who's a horrible actress, just to put her in the film,
she's real bad.
Yeah, and it takes away from the film. And so you look at all these, you talked about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If you look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first one, very gritty, but not a lot of blood, not a lot of gore at all.
Nope.
People think when they think Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's a ton of gore. There's really not. And then you go to the second one, and I don't know what happened with that one. It's a hilarious movie, and it's fun to watch, but it's even more gory than the original.
Oh, it's like 10 times more gory.
Right.
And you can also look at the time period when it came out. It came out, during the slasher craze of the 80s.
Right.
So like they needed to ramp it up to be able to keep up with a lot of the other, like, the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Streets and Hellraiser and those films. They were, that was what was hot at that time. So therefore that version of Texas Chainsaw Massacre that comes out at that time, they're going to lean into that. So you look at like, I can't think of the third name, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3,
Leatherface, yeah.
Came out a couple years
like the
after
Sword
that.
and the Stone, where the chainsaw,
right? Yeah, it comes up out of the water with the chainsaw, and that's like more serious because of you look at what's coming out around that time period, and they decided to go with a more serious feel for that one because I think that might have been even like early 90s maybe when that one came out, just different feel. So I mean, the original, for what it's worth, I think the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the finest horror movies ever made because they do so much with so little, and it feels so gritty, and it looks like a documentary because it's shot on the cheap.
Absolutely.
It's dusty. It's everything for the most part. Everything is shot during the day in the light, which now, like you can't even name a horror movie for the most part that's shot during the day, except at least in the studio system. I mean, a lot of independent ones are just for cost purposes, but like that movie does everything practically too, and like there's no like it's Gunnar Hansen running around with a real chainsaw with a chain on it, and like there's this element of danger when you watch it. I don't get that from a lot of movies anymore. There's been some stuff recently now the last couple of years I feel that like because independent filmmaking is now so open to everybody, there's definitely you start to kind of feel a little bit more danger in some of those films, but in the studio system it all just feels so safe in genre film, and it's frustrating sometimes.
Well, just to kind of wrap up the point, because we kind of, went back and forth on that, but, just to wrap up the point with Rob Zombie, he really tries to reach back and kind of beckon that film that we're talking about, but he doesn't seem to be one of the ones that can pull it off. And so what I think happens is not only does he hurt films that are trying to do it today, but it hurts films from back then that he's trying to copy, because you get someone that looks at it and they're like, that's ridiculous. I would never watch that movie. I would never watch the one that it's based on. And I don't care who made it. When you have people that can pull it off, when they remade The Evil Dead, they say that's one of the best horror films ever made. When they talk about the remake of it. And when you look at the original, it's dark and stuff, but it's pretty campy. You would have to admit it's pretty campy.
Oh, for sure. Even, because I mean, Evil Dead 1 and then Evil Dead 2 are essentially the same movie, just second one had a bigger budget to it.
Right.
It's, camp and horror go hand in hand. I mean, we did on the OTC we just recorded that's coming up for this week. We did the Blob remake that came out in 1988, and that's a really good example of reimagining a super campy movie from the 50s in, you know, a 1988 mindset.
Right.
And I feel like Rob Zombie, one of his biggest issues is he can't separate the idea of where he's coming from, or like, and like where his influences are coming from and where he lives. They're two very different places, and he just can't seem, I think, to pull it all together. And I think one of the biggest issues is, you know, he has a lot of fanboys that will celebrate and worship whatever he does, and that's fine. Hey, that's, you know, that's, people can like whatever they want to like, but I think sometimes the fandom that comes along with horror, and people will just like, regardless of whether it's something good or whether it's bad, if it's by a filmmaker or a director or a writer that they love and support, they get kind of blinded, I think, by the name that's attached to it. And it's like, well, you
Absolutely.
know, well, Rob Zombie's such an amazing filmmaker. It's like, well, is he really? Out of all of his movies, I can't think of one of them that I'm 100% on board with. And the last like 3 or 4, I mean, real bad. That 31 that came out, real bad.
Lords of Salem, is that another one?
See, Lords of Salem is the one that's in there that I think, although I still didn't really like it, I will give him props for trying something different.
Okay.
That was very Italian influence. That was very Argento influence. That's more like, we had mentioned Suspiria earlier, strictly for the lighting, but Lords of Salem is definitely super inspired by Dario Argento's Suspiria. Some of the stuff that Mario Bava did, and then also some of the Martino stuff, I think. And I'll give him props for trying to do something different with that. But, you know, in the scheme of his filmography, it's a complete failure, because it wasn't the Firefly family, and it wasn't Blood and Guts, and it wasn't, you know, all this crazy shit going on. Even his Halloween movies, like, I mean, the second Halloween movie, what's the deal with Sherry riding around on a horse? Like, just, that's, I'm like, I don't understand why you're doing this.
Right. And that's the whole thing that I think that we get at with him is, first off, though, I want you to kind of explain, because you and I can talk about it, but when you talk about Argento and stuff, maybe people that are listening that don't know exactly what you mean about that. Can you kind of describe what you're saying about? Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of Italian cinema, and specifically Italian genre cinema. So like stuff like Italian horror movies. There's a subgenre called giallos that were very prevalent in the 70s that were made in Italy, that are essentially sort of the precursor to the slasher movie without the like weird like supernatural elements. They were mostly really just kind of like murder mysteries that were at the time considered to be like very violent and very gory. So Dario Argento is an Italian director who did a run of movies, including some giallos and some supernatural horror movies. And one of his most famous movies is a movie called Suspiria, which was remade last year or the year before by, I can't remember his name, but Dakota Johnson was the main star in it. And it was like, I think Amazon put it out. But so Suspiria is the first in his Witches trilogy that he put out. And it's like super stylized, and it's got a lot of like heavy blue lighting and heavy red lighting. And it's very kind of dreamlike and all about atmosphere. And a lot of Italian cinema from this time period, especially the horror stuff, is all very much living in that kind of like dream state. So like Lucio Fulci is another director from that time period. He did a film called House by the Cemetery and The Beyond, which are classic Italian horror films that again live in this kind of weird, bizarre dream state. And these guys all have a very heavy influence on directors like Rob Zombie, Tarantino a little bit. But if you start to kind of dig into horror from especially the last, like I'd say the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of stuff that's heavily influenced by Italian cinema, specifically the horror films and the giallos from that time period. So, Argento is a guy that has made some amazing films, Opera, Deep Red, Tenebrae. He produced Demons. There's like a whole run of them. But their influences, like their fingerprints are all over a lot of like zombie style of filmmaking, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and the whole thing with that, when you talk about those kind of films, I think that once again, we go back to when you say Suspiria, when you bring that up, Amazon made it, and they made a huge deal about it. Now, I don't know that it did that great, because I think they did a theater release and then a home release with Amazon and stuff. And I don't know that it did, that well. But once again, when we talk about these films that people would never think that would be a popular thing, we go back to remaking them. And we just kind of keep going back to that well, where people will say, I would never watch something like that. Oh, it's on Amazon. I'll watch that. It's made by Amazon, and they have no idea the history that comes behind it. And now what I love about 70s films, I really, really love, like blaxploitation films. I absolutely love it. And a lot of people don't understand that, but they are very great, for storylines. Across 110th Street is great. The Mac is great. Superfly, you look at those now, you get into like Superfly 2 and stuff, but those originals have a very, very good crime story that you see starting to go back to in film today. Yep, and I absolutely love them. I mean, if you look, Eddie Murphy is famous again because he did Dolomite on Netflix. And everyone says that movie is absolutely horrible, but once again, he's famous from bringing that back into the forefront of people watching it. And then people go to YouTube and people go to the internet and people buy the Blu-ray, and then companies like Arrow and stuff put it on Blu-ray and make $1 million off it. Can you tell me why you think that is? Why we keep going back to this thing where people were like, oh, those were horrible. Oh, wait, I'll watch it. It's got Eddie Murphy in it.
I think for a lot of production companies and studios is because it's easy. They can just take a product or, a franchise that they know is, got a following, whether they consider it's good or not. I don't think even factors into their decision making. I think it's, can we get the rights and can we put the name on it? A perfect example of, like the remake, the horrors of the remake, is we just did our anniversary show last week, and we always do our top 6 and bottom 6 films that we reviewed from the last year. And my number one for worst films we watched last year was the Prom Night remake from a couple of years actually probably 9 or 10 years ago now. But like, there was this glut of remakes of marginal horror movies about 10 years ago. And Prom Night is the worst offender and the perfect example of how bad these films are, because the original Prom Night really isn't that great anyway. And they remade it, and they took anything that was endearing about the original out of it, stuck the Prom Night name on it, and we're like, oh, it's, a remake of the classic slasher flick. And then you watch it and it's not even a slasher flick. So I think what it comes down to is they go back to these things because they know there's already a built-in audience for it. And it's not really about, and this isn't for everything. I think, using Prom Night as an example, it's a 1 week box office bump is what that movie gets made to be released for dates on the first weekend it opens, knowing that they'll probably do a bunch of money the first weekend it comes out, and then it's going to fall off and then disappear, and then we'll dump it on DVD, and horror fans will buy it because horror fans will buy any. Their idea, this would be the big movie studio. This is not me saying this. Horror fans will buy anything, so we'll just put it out. Which, unfortunately, like, is a stereotype for a reason. Like, I've been to a lot of conventions in my life, and there's always somebody from some movie that's there that you're like, why is this person here? It's like the boyfriend from the Prom Night remake is here signing autographs, and they got a line, and it's like, who wants to meet this guy? Like what's going on here?
That actually happened to me in California at my very first convention. I went to a Fangoria Weekend of Horrors, and it was probably, man, it had to be 20 years ago in Pasadena. And my buddy and I were walking, and we see this super old guy, and we see some people talking to him. He's kind of signing some stuff. And so he's like, hey, you guys want to look at my stuff? And I'm like, who are you? And he says, I'm the bartender from The Shining. And I was like, okay. And he was like, $10 and I'll sign something for you. I'm like, he's old. I'll have him sign it.
This guy probably needs the money.
Yeah, he's there doing that. But I understand exactly what you mean. Like, these people will come out of the woodwork and people will line up to meet them.
At least he was in for, at least that guy, he's from like a famous, like legitimately one of like the best movies ever. Like, not like, this is going to sound bad, but like, the black kid from the Friday the 13th remake is signing autographs. This is a true story, charging $30 at the convention that we used to have here in Massachusetts called Rock and Shock. And it was like, the movie had only been out for like 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And like, he actually had on his sign the black kid from the remake. Like, he didn't even put his character name because he knew nobody would know, but yet people are getting autographs from him. And it was like, so what do you like? What's your next movie? I remember we were talking to him and like, well, he's like, I'm probably done with acting. He's like, I actually make enough money doing this to be able to like, he's like, I work a full-time job, but like, I'll do this, like, like a half dozen conventions a year. And he's like, it's a nice little chunk of change that I put in my pocket. I was like, well, that's exactly why you do it. But I'm just not sure who's clamoring for an autograph from that guy. It's like, all right, hey, more power to you, man. If you can get out there and make that money, do it. I'm just not going to give it to you.
Well, but that's the whole thing, is where he tells you, yeah, I can make money. I can do it. And if you look around at these conventions, you see it all the time. And sometimes it's sad, though, when you look around and you see some of these people. One of the worst ones I ever saw was, so Batman and Robin were together. This was before Adam West died. And so he had Burt Ward with him. And they're sitting right next to each other at a table. Adam West is charging like $80 or $90. And Burt Ward's charging $30. Right next to it. I mean, they're at the same table. And I think, what separates the two? I mean, other than he's been a voice actor and stuff like that, really what separates their careers?
It's about continuing to work, keeping out there in front of people.
Yeah, I would guess so. I mean, but like you said, you go to these conventions and you see it time and time again. So in today's films, what would you consider cult now? Because like I said, this covers such a huge area. What would you consider a cult film now?
I mean, it's tough you got to give it time. Our show, we don't cover anything normally. I mean, there's things that come up, but we won't normally cover something till it's at least 10 years old. I think you got to get away from it, give it a little bit of time to breathe on its own and figure out whether it's going to really be a cult film. I mean, there's definitely some stuff that's come up, in the last 15 years that is going to be there. Like, I feel like Adam Green's Hatchet movies are in that discussion for being cult films. Whether you like them or not's a moot point, but like, I think they're in there. I think like Machete is something that people are going to really go back and revisit. Even something like Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch, I think, is something that in a few years, which that's now probably 10 years old, our people are going to go back and be like, oh yeah, this is a pretty wacky flick. And then anything that kind of falls, like into the genre stuff can get there. I mean, there's been a lot of really good horror movies the last 10 years or so. Stuff like It Follows and Revenge was another one that I remember watching a couple years ago that was killer. This movie we watched at a couple film festivals a couple years ago, Sadistic Intentions, is one that like killer movie. It just kind of flew under the radar and didn't really, got its release got messed up. But I think in a few years it'll end up probably on Shudder or like one of those places, and people can be like, oh shit, you see this movie Sadistic Intentions? This is great. Starts off as this like romantic comedy type thing and then turns into this like satanic like sacrifice thing. It's crazy. Excellent if you haven't seen it, Dustin. But I think it's really hard to tell. I think anything can fall into that for sure. But I think it's tougher for stuff to get like a bigger cult following now, just because the glut of stuff that we're hit with every moment of every day, every different streaming option that you have. And even just in the 5 years since we started making Survival, like things have changed. And when we were making the documentary, we realized like we're actually kind of under a time crunch to finish this, because the stuff that we're talking about, by the time we get done and get it out, there's going to be something new that's coming. Mm-hmm. And we luckily we finished and we got it released right when the real like streaming options started to hit. So like, Shudder was fairly new at the time. Even, and then now there's Tubi,
I was going to bring all those up. That was actually a question that I was going to talk about. So we can go right into that. So when we were kids, you have Cinemax, HBO, Showtime, USA did Up All Night, TNT did Monster Vision, you had Joe Bob Briggs, all those kind of things that helped keep those films alive back then. And very much so, because I remember watching those as a kid on all those different things. But today we have Amazon is huge for doing stuff like this. I think they have a gigantic library of these 80s and 70s films that people wouldn't give much attention to. You got Tubi, you got Pluto, you got Stir. Over the air broadcast, you have like Me TV. There's so many things. Svengoolie plays every Saturday to kind of keep these things alive. Do you think the more that we have these, two things I wonder what will happen. Do we crash this or do we make it grow to where we've never seen it before? Because I almost feel like something like this could have an oversaturation.
I think I can agree with you on that point, that I think there's a point where, but that's going to be falling, I think, more so on the companies that are behind it. And like, you can kind of see it now, whereas like, even just think back, Dustin, like 5 years ago, we had Netflix and we had Hulu. And that was like, really, I mean, those were like the two big ones. Netflix is where you watched your movies and Hulu is where you watched your TV shows. But now there's like dozens and dozens. And I'll just use Survival of the Film Freaks as an example. We released it physically on Blu-ray and DVD. And then we released a collector's VHS, and then we put it out digitally. So we put it out to buy on Amazon, and we put it out exclusively on Amazon purposely because we're like, let's just put it in one place, and then we'll, have it just send people to one thing rather than be like, oh, well, you can get it on Apple and you can get it on this, and you can get it on that. So we did that. We sold digital copies of it and we sold physical copies of it, through Amazon exclusively. And then we put it onto Amazon Prime after it had been out for, I think we waited 6 months, and then we put it to be included in Prime. And the numbers just, took off from there. But then we had a digital distributor that wanted to put it into other places. And now it's available. And I don't even know whether it helps us or not on like 16 different streaming services. So it's available on Amazon Prime. It's available on Tubi. It's available on like a bunch of different Roku ones. It's like all these different places that like I never even heard of or know how to get to or like know anything about.
Right.
So like, it's cool that it's out there, but it's almost just kind of like, why? Like why it's just, if it's just like sitting in a carousel somewhere, it's like, you think about it, like when you used to go to the video store, they would sell off the stuff that wasn't renting to get rid of it, get it out of there. And I'm afraid we may get to that point with the amount of stuff that's going into these streaming services where at some point they're going to be like, nobody's watching this. Let's just get rid of it. And then how do you see it?
We got to have physical then.
If you don't have a physical copy of it or a digital copy of it on a hard drive, which is why I personally am, I'm not saying that people should illegally download stuff, but like if you can't get a movie and you can't locate it, and we've done it for the show, for the podcast, a bunch of times, is like someone will be like, oh, you guys should cover, what X movie. Well, DVD's out of print, or it was never released on DVD. There's no Blu-ray available. It's not on any streaming services. Are you saying I can't watch this movie now? Like I can't download a copy of it from because somebody had the hindsight to rip their DVD and put it on a server somewhere in case somebody wanted to get a copy of it. So I love that we have so much stuff available to us, but at the same time, I know myself, if I'm not watching something that I'm reviewing for the show or something that I'm working on for, a video project or whatnot, I spend more time scrolling through Tubi or scrolling through Hulu or Netflix or HBO Max or Peacock or Shudder or any of the glut of services that I have, that I pay for all of them too. And the whole idea was, oh, it's going to get you away from cable and you're not going to have to spend nearly as much money. I spend more money now.
Yeah.
I have so many services and I don't use any of them.
Right. Well, and that's the whole thing. Whenever you talk about going, you don't even in these days, you don't even have to download it from someone's server or anything. You can go to YouTube and find pretty much anything you want to, or get it to an area that you can find. where you don't have to download it, which is great that these places like YouTube. Now, once again, I wonder what's going to happen when YouTube gets so full of video that they're not able to support it, or, you know, it goes back. With these, though, you look at like Tubi, Pluto, Stir, all those ones that I mentioned. Tubi, Pluto, and Stir are all free. You don't pay for those. And they have a very big following right now, especially Pluto. Yep. When you look at Pluto, when it originally started, it had some crap. Now MTV has joined it, Home and Garden has joined it, the Outdoor Network. I mean, they just made which is the greatest thing ever, a 24-hour Price is Right channel. So and they call it the Bob Barker era. But you look at all these ways that we can go and how we can consume. I feel that there might not be where it reaches a critical mass. I think that we get to more people than we could ever reach before. I think that it opens up a whole new world. In saying that, though, opening up a whole new world, Hollywood right now is doing nothing but remakes. I mean, they just talked about they're starting Indiana Jones 5 with Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. I worry that with this stuff being out there and everyone being able to grab it and see it, that's all we're going to see from now on is bad remakes, because there's not a lot that can really top the original.
You're not wrong, but you're also wrong.
Okay.
If I may say so.
No, absolutely.
I agree with you. Within the Hollywood system, absolutely. They are devoid of a lot of original ideas and continue to go back to the well. But, and I'm a perfect example of this, that in this day and age, anybody can make a movie if they want to. The means that are put at in our hands now for equipment and availability and cost is, I mean, anybody can make a movie. You can make a movie on your iPhone if you want to, and
shoot it in Dolby, can't you?
The new iPhone 12, you can shoot in Dolby. You have the options for 24 frames a second. You have slow motion capabilities. You have, you can buy gimbals. You can buy external microphones. You can buy light. Anybody can make a movie now, which is amazing. But that's also the problem, is that anybody can make a movie now. And as a podcaster, I've used that joke a number of times. Podcasting is amazing because anybody can podcast. Podcasting sucks because anybody can podcast. But I feel like there's amazing stuff out there now. There is just amazing stuff. I mean, you just got to look for it. Like, you can't count on the Paramounts and the Universals and the Sonys to give you quality content that you're not already exposed to. Like, there's so many good horror movies in the last couple years that, like, Shudder is actually really good for pulling stuff out. If you have local film festivals, like, go to your local film festivals. That's where some of the best stuff I've seen in the last 5 years. I've come across it, and I was never a big film festival guy. I would do conventions, but like, once our movie started playing film festivals, I started going to film festivals because we would get into them and I would be like, oh, wow. I'm like, I never even would have heard of this movie.
Right.
If I hadn't come across it. And then you wonder, like short movie, like short films, like we just put out a short and like it played in some festivals and stuff, but like, there's no home for that stuff outside of film festivals. Then, like, it's such a bummer because there's so many amazing shorts that get made, and especially like horror shorts. There's some unbelievable horror shorts that are out there, but there's no real home for them because nobody's looking for shorts.
Well, I've got a couple friends that I've interviewed and stayed in touch with them. So you have like Alok Mishra from, he did 1BR this year that's doing gangbusters all over. You have Philip Carroll and Chloe Carroll that did the honeymoon phase. And then you talk about those shorts. Chloe Carroll actually has a channel on YouTube that's nothing but horror shorts. It's called Fear Crypt. And it has people go there like crazy and watch the videos that are on there. You have guys that did it over in England with the movie Host. I don't know if you've seen that, but it is a fantastic.
Oh yeah, Host is great.
Yes. So I talked to Richard and all those guys over there, Neil and Adam, all those guys, and they are super excited about where film is at now, because like you said, everyone can make them, and you see some real guys that can shine that come out of this. And I love it because, you see a lot of stuff now that you wouldn't have seen before. I would have never heard of 1BR if it wasn't for streaming. I would have never heard of Host without streaming. Honeymoon Phase. Right. And you look at all these things, like the Honeymoon Phase is excellent when you look at it, and it's almost like Black Mirror, and it was shot for a small amount of money and yet looks fantastic. Great storyline, tight writing. Same with Hosts. I love where cinema has gone. I hate to say, but I'm almost glad that movie theaters are not doing well. And I'll tell you why.
I don't miss them.
Yeah.
I don't miss them.
And I'll tell you why. Because I'm seeing so many more things now with this streaming. I love that HBO Max did the same day in theaters as home with all their new movies, because I just watched one the other night, that The Little Things, that I'm glad I didn't pay for. It wasn't a bad movie, but I'm glad I didn't go spend $50 to go to the movie and get snacks.
Right.
And
How much is it to go to the movies on a Friday night now? It's insane.
Yeah. And so I don't miss it at all. There are some great independent films coming out now. And I really think, I've talked to all these guys that make these independent films, and I really think this is the renaissance of Hollywood. I think this is what's going to make these studios set up and take notice, is these scrappy motherfuckers that want to come in and do what they want to do. And you saw it very rarely. You saw it with like Quentin Tarantino. You saw it in here and there, and little dabs of it in Hollywood. And people thought, oh, it's super cool. It's with Quentin Tarantino. And you look at other guys, and believe me, I'm taking nothing away from Quentin Tarantino's films, but you look at some other guys that you're like, wow, I wish they would make more stuff, because they have got the eye for it. They have got what it takes. And it's not run by these studios. They are giving people what they want. If you look at fan films, look at Star Wars. You look at fan films on YouTube, it's unbelievable what people are doing.
Oh, for sure.
And so
have you seen the Never Hike in the Snow Friday the 13th fan films?
I've heard of them, but I've never seen them. Now, I have seen the Halloween Michael Myers and Jason one that they did together.
Yeah, watch Never Hike in the Snow. It's there's Never Hike Alone, and then the sequel is Never Hike in the Snow, and it's actually a prequel. They are better than the remake of Friday the 13th that came out like 9 or 10 years ago now. Right. They are better than like Jason Takes Manhattan. They're better than all those. This guy Vincent DeSanti is the mind behind them, and he's a friend of mine, and met him through a film festival and never would have known about his stuff. And now he does Kickstarters to raise money for these fan films, and makes like he made like hundreds of thousands of dollars on the like Kickstarters for these movies. Now, I mean, he puts that all right back into the movie,
right?
Because it's a franchise that he can't make money off it,
right?
But he puts all of that money into it to make it the best possible Friday the 13th movie that he can possibly make, and they're killer. Never Hike Alone is probably the best Friday the 13th movie that's been made since probably part 6. It's killer. It's great stuff.
6 is the new
Jason Lives. Is 6.
Yeah. So here's the thing, though, and with you, do you feel the same way as me when you talk about this guy having a Kickstarter and he takes the money and puts it right back in because he can't make money off the franchise? There's a huge difference to me in a guy that's working for a studio and getting paid $10 million to make this movie, and a guy that's just putting his heart and soul into a movie because he wants to see that franchise live.
It's a bummer, right?
Yeah. I mean,
it's amazing that he's willing to do it, but it's a bummer. Like, somebody should give Vincent, $10 million, which is a drop in a bucket for a Universal, or who I think New Line owns the rights for Friday the 13th. You can't tell me you couldn't give him even $5 million to make a Friday the 13th movie when you're dumping. I mean, how many actors make more than that just for one role?
Well, you talked about the remake. You're talking about Jared Padalecki that is probably got paid $15-20 million for that movie.
Oh, I don't think he got paid that much.
You don't think so? I mean, Supernatural was pretty strong.
I'm sure he probably did. He probably cleared almost $1 million to be in that, but I don't think he would have made. I don't think the whole budget for that was even over 30, and it didn't do well either. So
no, it did not.
It was just like Prom Night, where it did great opening weekend, and then kind of just disappeared after that.
So, what do you think, Bill? With with COVID shutting everything down.
I think it sucks.
What? Well, I don't mean in general. I'm talking strictly. Yeah, I'm talking strictly about movies. Where do you think we go? Is this premiere at home? Is this where it's at now? Because I think it is.
Yeah. I mean, as a guy that's a filmmaker now that has his current production shut down and has been shut down for almost a year now because of COVID, I feel like film festivals will probably come back in person to a point, which is where my bread and butter is. You know, like I want my stuff to play in film festivals, and then I don't really care if it gets theatrical release. Like Film Freaks did a run for film festivals, and then we had a couple like different showings. Like we had a couple, we had a week run in a theater in LA and a couple other places. But I'm much more inclined to be like, yeah, let's just let people watch it at home, stream it at home. That's where I watch my movies. If they watch it and they enjoy it, I don't care where they see it. It's the type of thing where, as you know, as a filmmaker, I just want people to see my stuff. I want people to be inspired by it, and I want people to think about whatever, you know, it is. Like, you know, if you're into cult movies and you watch Survival of the Fittest and you get inspired to go back and watch Alejandro Jodorowsky's movies, or you get inspired to go back and watch Cronenberg stuff, or you start to dig into Italian giallos because you seemed interested by it. I don't care where you watched it. So, you know, I mean, in the whatever the post-COVID normal is going to be, because I don't think there's going to be I don't think we're ever going back to the way it used to be. But I'm not worried about it. Good films will get seen. People will find the movies they want to find. They might just have to, you know, do a little bit more digging.
Now, let me ask you, though, when you say that, is it because you're new to the industry? Do you think you feel that optimistic because you're new? Because I have this feeling that a lot of it is the way it is because a lot of people are jaded.
You know, maybe maybe a bit because I'm still pretty new. I mean, we've been doing it now for, I mean, I'm probably going like 5 or 6 years, and I've been doing it full time for about 2.5 or 3 or so. But I come from the mindset of I'm a DIY guy. I grew up in the punk rock and hardcore scene. I was in bands, so I booked shows in people's basements and rented out church halls and VFWs. So I come from a DIY background, and that type of filmmaking and that type of mindset is so removed from working in a studio system. And I've never worked in the studio system, but I know a lot of people now that do. And it's just a different, it's not even in the same realm.
They're miserable.
So some of them are, but like, there's some people that like, you know, that's what they know. One of my buddies, BJ McDonald, who's a camera operator, has worked on some of the biggest movies, you know, over the last 20 years. He's a camera operator for Marvel movies. He's worked with The Rock a bunch of times, and he's like one of the most sought after Steadicam guys in the industry. But when he makes his own stuff, he does it on his own. You know, he made Slayer videos, and basically the record label just gave him the money and was like, all right, figure it out, do your thing. And he likes to do it that way. But, you know, when he works as a camera operator, he works in the studio system and the union system and that, because it's just easier because of where he is. Like, I live outside of Boston. We don't have that here. You know, there isn't a system. The system is, I call Kyle and I'm like, hey, let's do this. And then he calls that person. And then we're like, hey, can you work for free this weekend? Or like, hey, we don't have a lot of money, but we can give you extra to work with us for a day. So it's just, I think it's just different. I don't think I could ever really get into that mindset, because that's not in my DNA. That's not the way I was brought up. That wasn't the way that I learned filmmaking. I've learned, you know, everything I've done on the fly, and I don't think I'm ever going to be making stuff that's going to get into that system, because I'm primarily a documentary guy. Like that's kind of where I want to live. You know, documentaries and music videos are the things that I've done. So I got 2 documentaries under my belt with a third in production, and then I've done, you know, a half dozen music videos or whatever. But Kyle, you know, my main production partner that I work with, he's the narrative guy. So like, he's into, you know, writing the scripts, and, you know, we're storyboarding and we're shot listing and all that stuff that I don't necessarily care about.
Right.
What were we talking about? No, yeah, I'm jaded. Sure.
No, and the reason I ask that is if you're not jaded yet, because it's guys like you that got me into podcasting. It really is, listening to your stuff, and it's guys like you that brought me into it. And I'm relatively new. I've been doing it for about 2 years. But I feel the same way. I'm like, man, if you just heard my stuff and you tell me, hey man, that was awesome. I love that you did that. I love that, that person that you had on. I love that interview that you did. 'Cause that's what I stick to is interviews. I love that about it, man. I'm so happy, but I know that after a while it's going to be like, well, I got to make some money at this. I can't just keep throwing money at it without making money. And maybe the word's not jaded, but is it, that's why I asked that question. Is it because you're relatively new to it at some point where, because I remember on the show when you used to talk about your job,
Yeah.
you know, your full-time job and then that, and now it's so great that you've broken away and, you know, you can do this full-time, but I almost wonder, does that wear off after a while? Because I just knowing myself, I feel like it's going to wear off.
I think, I mean, I can talk to the podcasting side of that ad nauseum. I got very jaded in podcasting for a pretty good run for, I'd say, a couple years where I was really just like unhappy with the state of podcasting. So when Outside the Cinema started, it was, you know, a little over 13 years ago now at this point, and we were kind of at that forefront of the second wave of podcasts. So Adam Curry had kind of started it, and that kind of ebbed and flowed. And we came along with like a bunch of other shows that were doing similar things, and the shit exploded. Like we did unreal numbers from like year 2 to like year 5 or so. Like we're talking like, you know, like millions of downloads that we could never even sniff today if we wanted to, because podcasting ebbs and flows. It shifted. The hot thing now, and has been for the number of years, is celebrities doing podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So I would actually pose a question to you now. How tough is it to kind of break in to podcasting now? Because it's almost like the studio system is taken over. If you're not a name and you're not like an actor or an actress or a comedian, or like you're a writer that's written a bunch of books, or you're friends with so-and-so and you get this person, or you're Joe Rogan and you're this, it's really difficult to get anywhere, because you're not going to get the sponsorships that like you would have gotten 10 years ago. And you're not going to get like featured on, you know, Spotify's podcasts of the week, or here's our recommendations, because it's like, well, who are you?
Well, allow me to retort. I would love to answer that question.
Love it.
And I'll tell you, you're exactly right. I won't say I get very frustrated, but I've had a couple of people on here where I look at them, and I've interviewed one of them twice, and he actually asked to come back and be interviewed a second time. And I see that 100 people listen to that episode. And I looked that he did a podcast with a big name a week later after me, and there's 27,000 downloads in a day. And I'm like, I did the exact same, and maybe even, I don't want to sound like conceited about it, but maybe even a better interview if they asked to come back and be interviewed a second time.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
And when they push it, that gets very frustrating, because I'm like, wow, you know, I need out there. I know that I'm doing good stuff. I know that I'm getting who I want. And you're exactly right. You'll call people and they're like, who the fuck are you? And you're like, look, I promise if you come on, it's very professional. I'm small. I don't have a ton of money, but I promise you it'll look professional. It'll sound professional. I put every, you know, heart and soul into it. Just trust me on it. And you'll get ones that do. They'll come on and they'll be very happy with the end product and everything, but you'll get a lot that will just blow you off because you're not a Joe Rogan. You're not this. And it always comes back. I believe that it will always go full circle, that once you break into it and you get a foothold, you're going to hold a foothold. But until then, man, it can be difficult. I have a full-time career and everything, and I spend a lot of nights until 1 o'clock in the morning writing and emailing, editing. I mean, you know how it goes.
Oh,
And
yeah,
sometimes it feels very underappreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten over it now. Like I came to the realization a couple years ago now that if I'm going to do OTC and continue to do OTC, I have to do it because I love it. It's not, we have a Patreon and we bring some money in from the Patreon, but it ain't paying my bills. It ain't making me rich. It ain't even filling the cup, if you know what I mean. But
Right.
you know, we have a smaller but dedicated listening base now. And I know that those people, and I know that people appreciate that. It's like, yeah, maybe like, you know, in our third year, we were able to pull down, you know, like 6 million downloads or whatever it was. But it was like, how many of those people actually like invested into the show? Like we were on different networks that it would play and stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's playing somewhere and it counts as a download, but does it really mean anything? I'm much happier with having that small dedicated group that listen every week than, you know, the echo chamber of, you know, everybody that's just looking to kind of take you down at the first shot, because that's why podcasting got nasty there for a while in the independent podcasting world. Because everyone was looking for a reason to take somebody else down. And I don't have time. I don't have time to deal with that. And like, it's like, it's just stupid.
Right. Yeah.
So I do it because I love it still. And, you know, I still get frustrated with, like, I don't do a lot of interviews on the show. We were doing some live shows for a little while during the pandemic and getting some people to come on, but they were mostly just people I was friends with, or, you know, people that I had, you know, acquaintances with. But I had one YouTube guy, who shall remain nameless, that I was trying to book on the show because we talk a lot of music, and he does these music YouTube episodes of stuff that I really enjoy. And I reached out to him and was like, hey, you know, I do this podcast. We've been doing it for a long time. And I think you could come on and we could have a really good conversation about a number of different things. And he was like, okay, what are your numbers? And I was like, all right. We've been around for 13 years. You know, this is our average numbers. We go from this to this to this, you know, in this thing. And it's like, and he was like, yeah, I don't think it's really going to do enough for me. So I think I'm going to pass. I mean, at least he got back to me, which was nice, because that doesn't always happen.
True.
But I was just kind of like, all right, man, cool. But then I realized if I had reached out to this guy and was like, hey, my name's Bill Fulkerson. I'm an award-winning documentary filmmaker, and I'm working on this new documentary on whatever, you know. We'd love to sit down and talk to you, potentially do an interview for the documentary and see if you would be interested. You know, that dude would get back to me in like a second.
Yep.
But like, my podcast isn't important enough. But like, it's all so weird how it kind of like,
it's a weird space right now.
Yeah. And I don't want, and the thing is, it's like, I'm not like, if you listen to OTC, like I talk a big game, and I'm not really like that, like in everyday life. Like, it's not that I don't do a character, but like, I, you know, puff up my chest and be like, oh, you know, we won, you know, I'm an award-winning filmmaker. It's like, yeah, I'm poking myself down with this though. Like, this is just like, and we're all in the same place, and we're all trying to, you know, get our little piece of the pie. And I don't even necessarily mean monetarily. I just mean like, all try to carve out a little thing. And I think people kind of forget that, like, you need to work together. And a lot of like, you know, coming on and doing this interview with you, it's like, yeah, I want to do that. Why wouldn't I want to do that? If I can make that happen, I absolutely want to do that.
Right.
It's like, why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to promote your stuff to, like, even if your listenership was only like 5 people, like those are 5 people that have maybe never heard of me, or have never heard of my movie, have never heard of the podcast, have never heard of your podcast, or, you know, the people you've talked to. Like, why wouldn't you want to introduce yourself to those people if you can make it work? You know, I get people don't have time, you know, like sometimes schedules don't work.
Absolutely.
That's fine. But like, why wouldn't you want to still promote yourself? Like, that's the idea of celebrity is like the most bizarre thing to me, of like, you have fans, but you don't want to take the time to talk to them or share information with them. Well, I don't know. It's bizarre.
No. And I know what you're saying. And that's why the interviews that I try and do, I try and tell people's stories. Like, anyone that has a great story is who I want to talk to, whether that be a filmmaker, whether it be a soldier, whether it be a police officer, whether it be a firefighter, whoever it may be that has a story that people haven't heard. that's what I want to do on my show. And so that's the love that I get from it is people kind of sharing a part of them on the show, talking about what they like to talk about. That's what I love the most about it. And like I said, 2 years, I'm relatively new, but I absolutely fell in love with it. I love interviewing people. I love reading about people and watching their movies and talking to what their creative process was to it and stuff like that. That's what's fun to me. The numbers will come. If you love it, the numbers will come.
Right. And it's also too, like, you always have to kind of like figure out where you want to be. Like,
Right.
are you doing it for the right reasons? Like you're doing it for the right reasons because these are things you enjoy. Like, you didn't sit down behind the mic and be like, all right, what is my road to 100,000 listeners?
Yeah.
Because then you're doing it. You're chasing numbers that aren't real anyway. It's like, sure, maybe you get 100,000, you can get 100,000 downloads, but like, they're just a number. You don't know these people. Like, they're not giving you money, but like, if you can get like 50,000 listeners that are also going to pony up on a Patreon or like buy t-shirts or like give like a reason, then like, okay, well, that's cool because people are invested in it. I would much rather have 500 invested listeners than 100,000 people that like just don't care, that are just like your background noise.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. So let's talk about your film for a few minutes. We've been talking about it the whole way through, but let's talk about it.
That sucks.
No, it's really great, and it brought up some ones that I haven't seen that I would like to see. That's where I got the idea for 10 to Midnight, and then I went and found it, and I was like, wow, this is a great Charles Bronson movie. Actually, it's probably one of my favorites now of Charles Bronson.
Also, one of my favorite OTC reviews we've ever done was 10 to Midnight. I don't remember when we reviewed it. It was a long time ago now, but we did a review of that, and it's one of the best reviews we've ever done.
Yeah, it is a great. I could have done without the nude killer for a lot of the film.
I think that adds to it, though, man.
I think roughly 95% of the film. I felt like that guy couldn't wait to take his clothes off in that movie.
He was just so angry all the time about being naked too.
And
he's
then
he's in the shower and he's like pounding on the shower and he's like, I was like, what is happening right now?
Well, the daughter I figured out was the girl from Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah, she was. She was actually in a bunch of stuff around that time period.
Yeah, so I mean, I loved it. Your film though goes into it, and I love how it explains it. It's not just this kind of film, and it's not just this, and it's not just this. It's everything that you can think of. So for me, it's more of a nostalgic walk through your documentary, and that's what I like about it. You talk about the cover art, which brings up favorite cover art from this era.
Man, that's a tough one.
I got one right off the top, Chopping Mall, with the robot hand that I'll never forget. I saw that as a kid. I never saw the movie as a kid. I saw the cover art and I loved it. And then I saw it for the first time. I'm like, that fucking art doesn't have anything to do with this movie.
Yep. One of my favorite slasher movies that's just so ridiculous is Sleepaway Camp 2.
That's with the backpack?
That's the backpack with the Freddy glove and the Jason mask and this hot chick like walking with like the backpack. Chick's not in the movie. It's not Freddy. It's not Jason. There's like a little scene in there where they kind of pay like homage to it, where they dress up and stuff. But like, it's just like actress that has nothing to do with it. And that's one that I always remember. The I Spit on Your Grave artwork is one of my favorites. Again, super misleading.
I love that one. Maniac.
Love the Maniac. Obviously, our cover art when our poster art, we were figuring out what we were gonna do, and Joel Robinson, whose website artpusher.net, he does a lot of the covers for Scream Factory and a lot of those like boutique labels.
Yeah, those are great labels now, though. They do. Great
Scream Factory is great. Arrow is great. Vinegar Syndrome. The dudes at my buddy Brandon that works over at Vinegar Syndrome. If you want to get into some real smut of like stuff, Vinegar Syndrome is the place to go. But Joel, we reached out to Joel because I'd met him a couple of times. So I was like, hey man, I'm like, so we got this doc. It's an homage to like different cult movies and stuff. And I really think that if we could repurpose the Maniac cover art, we could do something really cool. And he bid on that and was like, yeah, let's do that. That's absolutely one of my all-time favorites. I also really like the cover art to a lot of different blaxploitation ones. 3 the Hard Way is one of my favorites, which has got Jim Brown, Fred Williamson, and Jim Kelly in it, and it's like this like awesome like blaxploitation style painting with the 3 of them like around it. One
Doing
of them
karate kicks and stuff, right?
Yeah. Kelly's doing a karate kick, and you got Williamson and Brown on either side with big guns. Love that.
Which they paid that back in "I'ma Get You, Sucker."
Yep, they did.
Yep.
It's almost the same. Yeah, almost the same thing. I love the classic Halloween 2, which is the jack-o'-lantern with like the skull face in it. That's one of my favorites. Man, I love a lot of that, like the old, like the 70s, like painted stuff.
What about do you remember the Video Dead or Dungeon?
You remember
Master?
the Video Dead? Yeah. That was one that I had never saw. And that, that reminds me of Demon Wind. The VHS box art for Demon Wind.
I've heard of that one, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, it's awful. Don't worry about it. We reviewed it on the show. Not worth your time. I'm just looking around the room with some of the other ones that I had.
The
I took
Wraith
a lot of my.
is a good one.
Oh yeah, I like the Wraith. The Wraith is
Yeah.
good. I also like some of those ones that are just super ultra like macho, like Schwarzenegger's Commando.
Yes,
Where he's
that's
all
a
like
great
he's all
one.
like all greased up on the front, or the Barbarians, the 2 Barbarian brothers.
Yep.
And Creep Show, the classic Creep Show box art. Awesome.
Well, so I guess you don't really have a favorite. I will say, and the only reason I say Chopping Mall is because that one has stuck in my brain for so long. I said it has to be my favorite if it's stuck that long.
Yeah, I would say Maniac is one of, if I had to choose only one, I think Maniac would probably be the one I'd go to.
All right, you ready for the kind of last question to wrap this up?
Sure.
Favorite film
Of all time?
Well, we'll do it in steps. Favorite film of all time.
It used to be, believe it or not, it used to be Braveheart. It's not really anymore.
Wow. I would not expect that answer from you.
Right. American Werewolf in London is probably the one that sticks out the most for me. I love everything about that movie. I feel like it's almost like the perfect line of like a little bit of comedy, but also brutal horror stuff. The Werewolf Transformation still to this day makes my skin
That's
crawl.
John Landis, right?
John Landis, yeah.
And Rick
David
Baker did the Rick Baker did special effects, right?
Yep, Rick Baker did the Werewolf Transformation in it. Yeah, that's one of my all-time favorites that I will always go back to.
I think mine is my favorite movie of all time. I say is Creature from the Black Lagoon.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I love it. I love I watched it recently, and the underwater scenes hold up so well for being such a new technology. They hold up really well. The storyline holds up well. I don't know though that I would ever want to see a remake. I've thought I would, but I don't know. I mean, there's been some people like you had Todd McFarlane that came in and kind of did his creation of what Creature from the Black Lagoon would look like now. But I don't know that I would want to see that. But if I had to say a favorite movie, it'd be Creature from the Black Lagoon, followed quickly by A Few Good Men.
I feel like Shape of Water is like the closest you could do to kind of doing a remake or reimagining a Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Well, in saying that, I think you would definitely have to do a Guillermo del Toro. He would have to kind of helm that.
For sure. Few Good Men is really, really good too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about it. It's just, I don't know that you can find a fault in it. I really don't. There's no perfect movie, but I don't know that you can really find a fault in it. In the layout, in the look of it, in the writing of it. I don't know that there's,
It's got incredible pacing too. It's a long movie, but it never feels long. That was one of my things with Braveheart, was despite its 3.5 hour runtime, it never feels like it gets long.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand. Okay. So favorite horror film.
Other than American Werewolf, I'm a huge fan of Creepshow.
Okay.
I love anthology movies in general, and I feel like Creepshow is the perfect example of a horror anthology, because all of the stories in it are strong. They're all, they're Stephen King stories, and George Romero's is in there directing. So it's, it's basically like superstars of the genre coming together and making their version of an EC Comics, movie brought to life. And if I was to choose another one that's more of a kind of a standard movie, Suspiria is one of my favorites.
I would have to say Dawn or Day of the Dead. And then if I'm going to get more current, I think Stephen Cognetti did a fantastic job with the Hell House trilogy.
Yes, Hell House LLC is criminally underrated in terms of what they accomplished on and especially in the first one on a pretty tight budget.
Yeah. It's going to be a TV show now. It's going to be a
series. I had heard that. Yeah.
I talked to him.
Is that actually getting done?
Yes, it is. It's called the I'm trying to think of the town that it takes place in. I'm drawn
Abaddon.
It's called the Abaddon Tapes. The Abaddon Tapes is what it's called. And he's in the middle of that right now. Another one recently, my oldest daughter is huge into horror films, and I showed her Followed. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Antoine Lay's Followed.
I haven't seen it yet.
It is fantastic. It's fantastic. And I really like I really like found footage films, because I feel like those are people once again just going, hey, I'm going to make a movie and this is what I want to make it like, and they do it. And so, yeah, I would have to say those. I would have to say, if we're talking about film by film standards, I would say Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. I think they're both fantastic films.
If we're talking found footage, I go back to Cannibal Holocaust.
I can't do it.
Yeah, no, you know what? Hey, it's a rough movie. There is absolutely no doubt, because of the animal stuff that goes on in it, and it's just brutal. But it's so well made and so believable as you're watching it that you're just like, yeah, these people might be dead. Like, this really might have happened.
A big thing when it was made was they thought they were dead.
Yeah, Deodato was taken to court over it. He had to bring the actors and actresses to court to prove that they were alive, and then they threw the case out. But it's not an easy film to watch. Luckily, Grindhouse Releasing put out a Blu-ray and a DVD of it a few years ago where you could watch it without the animal stuff in it, which makes it a little bit easier to digest. But there's still just some incredibly skin-crawling stuff in that film. But it's so well made, and it's so effective. It's so effective.
So, crime thriller, I would say. Favorite crime thriller?
I like Seven. I'm a big Fincher fan. There's a great, here we hear Bill going back to the Italian stuff. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's got Franco Nero in it. I can't think of it. The Italian Polizia flick. I'm gonna have to look it up. Hold on.
Okay.
Because it's got like a crazy Italian name.
I'm gonna have to agree with you on Seven.
Seven's killer, man.
They're comparing. I was telling you about The Little Things. People are trying to compare Seven to it. They are.
I haven't. I mean, I haven't watched it yet.
They're sorely missing the mark on it.
Really, the trailers. I think. Look, I'm. Here's the thing. I think Jared Leto is possibly one of those like most overrated like actors that's kind of going, and I think that guy's bought into his own hype because he gets a lot of love from people. And I'm kind of turned off by him in general now.
How do you feel about Rami Malek?
Who Denzel's in that too, right?
Yes. And I'm glad he is, because he makes it a lot better.
Okay. I mean, I want to check it out, I think.
Well, a lot of people are comparing it. It's the lighting, the locations, and I felt like it was very lazy. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a bad movie, but it was very lazy writing trying to follow Seven.
Oh, Rome Armed with Teeth.
Okay.
It wasn't Franco Nero, it was Thomas Milian. It's a great Italian police procedural thriller drama that's like probably the best example of like an Italian police thriller.
I think another one, a Korean one, would be I Saw the Devil.
Oh my God, we reviewed that. That was my number one for films that we reviewed last year. That was my number one film the year it came out. Also, I think that film, as tough as it is to watch, because it is very violent and it is very dark.
Excellent movie.
But it is so well put together. The way it's shot, the way it's written, the direction, the acting is on another level.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the best stuff, some of the best films of the last 15, 20 years have come out of Korea.
I absolutely agree with you.
Old Boy, Parasite from last year won Best Picture, for crying out loud.
Did not like Parasite though.
Did you not like it? But you can appreciate it and understand like that it's good. You just not into it, or did you not like it? Like
I did not like it.
Interesting.
And I love Korean films. The Man from Nowhere, I Saw the Devil. There's quite a few of them that I really like, because I think even if you look at that Netflix series, that's the Korean zombie. It's like a feudal zombie kingdom.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Right.
But
well, the best
Parasite
zombie movie of the last 15 years came out of Korea, Train to Busan.
Well, they're making the second one now?
Prequel. Or no, not a prequel. It's a sequel. It's already out. It's not very good.
Oh, okay. Aren't they always like that? But yeah. So yeah, just Parasite. I didn't care for it, like, at all.
Okay.
I tried to watch it and I'm like, nah. I just I don't know what it was. I just didn't like it.
It's definitely, I mean, it's different than his other stuff, but no, I really enjoyed it. But I can see why somebody wouldn't like it.
Well,
and
I think that's one of those hype things again, where you start believing your own hype and you kind of you phone some of it in.
See, I don't think any of it was phoned in, but I mean, he's what's his name? Bong Joon-ho.
Yeah.
His name, I think.
Bong. I want to say Bong Joon-ho, I think.
That sounds close enough. Mild racism there, but that's all right. Let me look it up. We can't drop his name and then not say his name properly. I'm terrible with names, so
yeah, I'm trying to think of what it is. But once again,
I think the idea of the class structure within Korea is a very tough thing for us as Americans to really kind of understand. Bong Joon-ho.
Okay. But I think it comes through in all their stuff. the class system, it came through in Kingdom, it comes through in I Saw the Devil. All that stuff comes, because if you look at those characters, you like I Saw the Devil, it's the chief's daughter and her husband, who's Secret Service, who's very high up in the government. And then this guy is kind of the dregs. And then if you watch, the film goes from way up here in socialites all the way down, and it ends in, I don't want to say the slums, but pretty close to the slums is how the film ends.
Yep. Well, did you see Snowpiercer?
Didn't care for it either.
Okay, so that's because that's the same director,
right?
And it's also, again, very heavily steeped in the class system.
Well, and everyone said Chris Evans, it's the best thing he's done since Captain America and stuff, and I'm like, no.
Well, what else has he done?
Right, but I was like, no, it's not. It felt very poor man's Hunger Games.
Okay. I love Snowpiercer.
Okay.
I think Snowpiercer is excellent. But I also love Parasite. So, but I can understand why people wouldn't be into those movies. Like there's some, I mean, it's like, there's some movies where you're just like, I mean, everybody liked Avengers Endgame. like everyone should like, and everyone like The Mandalorian, like everyone should like The Mandalorian. If you don't like Star Wars, then yeah, okay, I can understand not like, but like if you're even remotely into Star Wars or have interest in it and you watch The Mandalorian and don't like it, that doesn't make sense to me. But something like Parasite or Snowpiercer, I can understand. As much as I love and appreciate it, I can understand why somebody wouldn't like it.
Yeah, I don't know what it was about it, because I'm not bothered by like subtitles, anything like that. It doesn't bother me at all to watch something like that. You are right about The Mandalorian. That and the Clone Wars, and coming up, The Bad Batch is the best Star Wars stories there are out there.
Yes, for sure.
So I nerded out for a minute. So, Bill, what do you want to promote? Let's go.
Watch, if you haven't seen Survival of the Film Freaks, watch it. It's available on Amazon Prime. It's available on Tubi. pretty much kind of anywhere that you can get it, but you can watch it for free on Tubi. And if you have Prime, you can watch it for free on Prime. We also have a new short that we put out on Prime called Safer Spaces, a film about Shauna Potter. It is a 20-minute short music documentary about Shauna Potter, who's the lead singer of the feminist punk rock band War on Women. It kind of goes through her history a little bit and a little bit about the band and their music and the kind of their stance. I think it's an important film for kind of what's going on right now in the world, whether you support whoever you support. I feel like it's the type of thing where, take a look at it. It's an interesting, and they're a kick-ass band too, which always helps. And then outside the cinema, we record episodes weekly. We just started our 14th year. And it is available at OutsideTheCinema.com or anywhere you get podcasts. I think the only place we're not currently available is Spotify. And that's just on me for not setting it up.
Yeah, and so I'll explain the outside the cinema sign down here. Those days are wrong, but I really love this is one of my favorite ones from you guys. So I put that one up there. It's not live on Mondays at 5 p.m.
That artwork's dope, though. I forgot that artwork.
I just love that artwork, so I wanted to put that up there and kind of cover that area. So, Bill, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you had a fantastic documentary. I think you have a huge future ahead of you, especially in the film industry. You have so much knowledge. I could talk to you for hours about it. So I appreciate you coming by. Anything you need, guys, go check out this film. Check out the podcast Outside the Cinema. Check out the movie Survival of the Film Freaks. That's going to be it for the show this week. I'm DJ. That's Bill. This has been the show. We'll catch you on the next one. See you guys later. Bye.